Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today, I wanted to recap the mechanics of the Sentinel League for those of you that are interested in either playing the 2023 Blast from the Past event, or that are just still on the fence as to whether this event is for you or not. Fair warning, this video is about Sentinels specifically. Recombinators are the main type of loot that you get from this mechanic, and they need their own video to do justice to the mechanic because they are a very, very powerful crafting tool. They're also something that has a lot of complexity, a lot of nuance to it. However, the only way to get Recombinators is to do Sentinel encounters. So this video is going to focus mostly on the Sentinel content itself. The Recombinator side of things is going to be a separate video, but there'll be a little bit of discussion of it at the end of this video. So you can think of this video as a bit of a teaser for future discussion around the way Recombinators work, which will be probably the thing people are most excited about. Now, in short, Sentinel was Torment done better and dialed up to 11. Imagine if Tormented Spirits followed you through maps, they were indestructible, and they very, very, very obviously improved loot. It's not that they're just dropping more rare items that you filter out automatically. Instead, they start dropping more currency items, more maps, more things you're just interested in picking up. Additionally, while Sentinels can be pretty dangerous, they don't have some of the crazily dangerous mechanics that you get with Tormented Spirits, so none of the shenanigans where monsters gain the ability to explode other corpses or anything like that. Instead, monsters simply end up with much higher stats than they would normally have. Now, there are 3 types of Sentinels and 4 rarities. You can get these in Scoured, in Magic, in Rare, and in Unique rarity. And the unique ones are mostly a disappointment. We're not really going to go into the uniques in this video because whilst there are some uses for them, they're not anything that's truly amazing. You can think of the unique Sentinels as more like Goldrum and less like Mageblood, i.e. they're not something that you really want to chase after. They're something you'll definitely use if you get them at the right time in progression, but they're not something that is so good that you want to shape your entire character's plan around it, nor are they something that you're going to want to shape all of your interactions with the Sentinel mechanic around. Instead, just use them when you get them if they're better than your Rare Sentinels and your Magic Sentinels are, and if the Magic and Rare Sentinels are better, then just use those instead. Now, there are 3 main categories of Sentinels, each of which have a whole cavalcade of bases. A way I like to think of these is consider the chess piece slot in PathOfExile. You can get pure strength ones which grant you armor, pure intelligence ones which grant you energy shield, and pure dexterity ones which grant you evasion. There's also other ones as well, but there's these 3 things that fundamentally work differently to each other and that have some different stats and that just work in different ways. That's the case with Sentinels as well. Red Sentinels are called Stalker Sentinels, blue Sentinels are called Pandemonium Sentinels, and yellow Sentinels are called Apex Sentinels. Now, Pandemonium Sentinels are the best of the lot on powerful characters because they just fundamentally work differently to each other. I'm going to spend a bit of time recapping the way that each of these work. Stalker Sentinels are the best while you're getting going, and Apex Sentinels are generally outclassed by the other 2. Additionally, and very importantly, Sentinels have a limited amount of charges. Once they deplete, they become somewhat of a brick. We're going to get to the power core mechanics later, which allow you to take 2 Sentinels regardless of the amount of charges that they've got, merge them together, and your resulting Sentinel will have full charges. But there's a number of tactics we'll want to discuss around that. Sentinels do drop a lot though. What you want to look for is individually very, very, very powerful mods, like 3.9% chance for empowered enemies to have a currency reward. Something like this makes the entire Sentinel worth using. You'll also have access to a special passive tree for Sentinels. They don't start at full power. Instead, they level up as you kill Sentinel enhanced monsters, and they have their own passive tree. This passive tree is very limited. You're capped at 30 points in it, and getting 30 points is something that I feel like happens around level 92 or 93 from recollection, but I'm not absolutely sure on that, and unfortunately I can't go and test it in the game at the moment. It's something you'll get if you play a lot, and if you play a bit less, then you're going to get 20, 23, 25 points pretty quickly, but the last few points will take a bit longer. Initially, you can only use one Sentinel type, the red type. Later on, you'll be able to spec into the yellow and the blue Sentinels. So if you wanted to spec into yellow Sentinels, I generally don't recommend this. We'll get to why in a sec. Then the shortest path to do so is to go here, 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 here. And then you've spec'd into the yellow Sentinel node on the tree. You gain the ability to use Apex Sentinels. Alternately, if you want to go for Pandemonium Sentinels, i.e. blue ones, you can go this way, is one option that you've got. Or you can take other paths that are a little bit longer, but that might end up with a few more rewards along the way. Ultimately, which path you take is up to you. That said, if in doubt, towards the south end of this tree, there are a number of nodes that grant an increased chance to gain Sentinel rewards. This is a very, very powerful effect, and it's something that you should consider very seriously because it will govern the amount of Recombinators you get. If you're in doubt as to how to spec your passive tree for Sentinel, and it is free to respec this, then what I suggest you do is you fairly quickly path over to the origin for Pandemonium Sentinels, pick that up, and then once you've done that, path down towards the south end of the tree, where you can then spec into the ability to gain increased chance to gain Sentinel rewards. This is a very, very powerful stat. You want all of it that you can get. You can't get very much of it, and the only source of it is on the passive tree for the Sentinel Controller, so you're going to want to do that. Okay, so let's talk about using the 3 types, and we'll start with the red ones, the ones you can use at the start of the game, which are the Stalker Sentinels. So at the beginning, you're only going to have access to Stalker Sentinels. The 3 types of Sentinels default to key mapping on PC at least to F1, F2, and F3 keys. If you're playing on console, or if you're on PC and you're using a controller, it's going to be something else, but that's the default if you're playing keyboard and mouse. Now you can use up to 1 of each category in each Sentinel-friendly zone you encounter. And almost every zone in the game is Sentinel friendly, so this means you can use these in Heist, you can use them in Delve, which was actually quite a lot of fun in my experience, or you can use them in a whole bunch of places that I would not advise, except just to play around with them once. For example, you can use them in Maven's Invitations. Maven's Invitations, from a tactical perspective, are a very bad place to use Sentinels, but they are a lot of fun. So if you're looking for a wild fight against really, really juiced up map bosses, then that's something you can do. I also believe you're going to be able to use your Sentinels in the Lake of Calandra, and that's going to be important for some of the unique Sentinels that can only be used on very specific map bosses, some of which will not be on the Atlas at the moment. So the only way that you can find these bosses is to encounter them inside the Lake of Calandra. Now this Sentinel is the simplest of the 3 types mechanically. It's great in the campaign, it'll give you a big boost of XP and loot every time you use it, albeit at the expense of making monsters a bit tougher, and it's great for everyday mapping. When you optimize around them, the blue ones, the Pandemonium Sentinels, are better, but the Stalker Sentinels are still very, very good for general purpose mapping. What these Stalker Sentinels do is they follow you, and when they get close to an enemy, they charge up a quick cast spell. When this spell goes off, it empowers the monster. When a monster becomes empowered, it recovers to full health if it's taken any damage. It has a percentage chance to gain a Legion style reward icon. It gets increased item quantity and rarity and experience when you kill it. And additionally, it gains a number of statistical buffs. The most obvious of these is decreased percentage damage taken. As far as I know, the exact mechanics were never worked out, but they're fairly impactful, especially if the empowerment number listed on the Sentinel is high. You will definitely notice that that monster is a lot tougher than it normally would be. That said, the payoff is absolutely there, and these Stalker Sentinels are really good. So strategically, these are really simple. Just remember though, you need to stay close to the still living enemy for around 1/4 of a second for the Sentinel to work. So this means that if you've got damage you can't turn off on your character, like a Mirage Archer that's shooting everything whether you want it dead or not, then that's going to be something that's fairly disruptive when you're trying to use your Stalker Sentinel well. And once more, empowered monsters have higher stats than usual, so beware. In addition, you'll notice that the higher the empowerment number on the Sentinel, the higher these numerical increases to the monsters are. So the damage the monsters do goes up by a larger factor, as does their damage reduction, and the rewards for killing them, XP, number of loot items, and also the rarity of each loot item will scale up accordingly. Very importantly though, some of your Sentinels are going to have modifiers that give a percentage chance for a monster to have a particular type of reward. These don't scale up with additional empowerment. Now let's get the Apex Sentinels out of the way, shall we? Apex Sentinels are disappointing. The rewards from them are just okay. Sometimes you get lucky and you'll get like 5 copies of the same good reward, like you get 5 copies of a Sentinel reward and that's amazing. Or maybe you'll get 5 copies of a Delirium reward and you'll get a whole bunch of item level 84 plus cluster jewels. But these are much worse than the extraordinary rewards you're going to get from Pandemonium Sentinels. These will only work on rare and unique monsters by default, and there is an option in that Sentinel passive tree to turn off the ability to affect rare monsters. If you elect to use this, then they're only going to work on unique monsters instead. They have the highest empowerment number, which is kind of like having the highest percentage delirium, in that it gives the biggest statistic boost to the monsters. Apex Sentinels will give you loot when you use them. It's just that you'll find you'll get more from the Stalker Sentinels, and you will also get more from the Pandemonium Sentinels. I suggest that you only use your very, very best Apex Sentinels. The rest of them you can just get rid of. They're not particularly useful to you. Save them up, spec into these Apex Sentinels, and then use them all in places that have a lot of map bosses, but that those map bosses aren't particularly devastatingly strong. For example, it's reasonable to use these in Maven 10-way fights, it is absolutely unreasonable to use them in a difficulty 13 Lake of Calandra kill the map bosses encounter, where you're going to be facing off against very, very powerful monsters already, and all that the Apex Sentinel is going to do is amp them up even further than that. Maven 4-ways like the Formed are an option as well if your character is incredibly good at fighting bosses, but do not do this lightly. You need an absolute monster of a character in order to do this, but if you've got that, then yes, Apex Sentinels are a good option in Maven 4-ways as well. If you can't manage using the Maven invitations, then the other spot that has a lot of rare monsters that you can kill and also a number of unique monsters you can kill is Heist Contracts. I think that Heist Contracts are the best spot for using Apex Sentinels if you're determined to play around with them, but generally speaking, I would say don't bother with them. The Pandemonium Sentinels, the Stalker Sentinels are better, and you can only really efficiently use 2 with the number of points you've got access to on the Sentinel passive tree. Okay, so we've saved the best for last. Let's talk about the Pandemonium Sentinels. These are the best ones. When you activate them, there's utter pandemonium. An empowerment beam is fired at all monsters within range, and then this beam chains. As a result, pretty much everything that is within about a screen and a quarter radius of you is getting empowered. This empowerment effect is going to deliver percentage chances to drop specific types of loot that might be found as a mod on the Pandemonium Sentinel itself. And additionally, Pandemonium Sentinels have an intrinsic chance, based upon the empowerment number that they've got, to give you these reward icons as well. On top of that, more quantity, more rarity. This means you're more likely to get a Divine Orb as a drop, and you're going to see larger numbers of common items like Chaos Orbs as well. I generally consider these to be something like a build your own breach or build your own legion encounter. This turns a mundane pack of monsters into an extraordinary pack of monsters. They're going to fight back hard, but when you kill them, they're going to drop a very large amount of loot. But most importantly, you can choose when to set this off. So if you're surrounded by monsters that are intrinsically very dangerous, then you might just want to hold off on using your Pandemonium Sentinel. But if you're surrounded by monsters that don't have a very smart AI, that don't have very good damage projection, or that you've got extraordinarily good defenses against, or extraordinarily good offenses against, then this is the perfect time to unleash Pandemonium. What you want to do, gather a huge pack on one screen. The absolute best use case for these, and this was the dominant strategy in patch 3.18 in the Sentinel League, was to enter the Glacier map and round up at least 100, ideally 150 or more monsters, all in that first area of the Glacier map. Then get them all onto one screen and unleash Pandemonium. Kill these monsters, loot, exit the map, and repeat the process in a new Glacier map. Now if you run out of Glacier maps, then Beach is not terrible either. It is definitely inferior to Glacier, but they will both work. Glacier just has more monsters in the entry than any alternative in the game. But by all means, feel free to experiment with other maps as well. Maybe you like just running through Crimson Temple, rounding up a whole bunch of monsters, getting them all in one place, and then detonating Pandemonium, and hoping that you manage to get a lucky Apothecary card. Most importantly though, you don't need to use these Pandemonium Sentinels in Glacier for them to be good. They are just universally very, very strong. Once you're in a position that you're able to run into a big pack of monsters and just stand still once for maybe a third of a second, that will be long enough to unleash Pandemonium and to get the ball rolling on your Sentinel encounter. The next thing you're going to see a lot of is power cores. Power cores are the only crafting that's possible for Sentinels other than using ID scrolls on them. What you do with these is you input 2 Sentinels, and these Sentinels can actually be empty of charges. They will then combine into one merged Sentinel, and this will be full-on charges even if both inputs were empty. Now this output Sentinel will have a 50-50 chance of being each of the 2 bases that you submit. It then also has a very tiny chance, or a slightly higher chance in conjunction with a transforming power core, of being changed from that into an augmented base. And then on top of that, it will keep about 60% of the mods that are put onto the input Sentinels. Now when I say about 60%, this is a very fuzzy about. When I'm saying about 60%, this is not based on a large statistical sample or anything of the sort. This is just my own feeling on the number of mods. What this means though, is that you can use power cores to get a second use of a really good mod that you happen to have on a Sentinel. Now let's talk about the tactics to these. There are also mundane power cores which don't have an additional word before them. Now you should use your amplifying power cores on your very, 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 very best Sentinels after they run out of charges. At least you should do this if those Sentinels have a great mod on them, and that mod is not tier 1. For example, if you have tier 2 chance to drop a Delirium reward, tier 2 chance to drop a Sentinel reward, these are fantastic candidates for the use of an Amplifying power core. That said, those Sentinels are so good that you should use up all the charges on the tier 2 version first, and then once it's fully drained, then and only then do you pull out the Amplifying power core to give it a second life. Transforming power cores are a bit weaker. You want to use these on other bases that have at least some good mods on them, especially if you get a rubbish base for a Sentinel. And you can tell a base is rubbish if it has a very small number of monsters that is its limit to the amount that it can empower. The augmenting and the generic power cores should be used on fairly good Sentinel bases, i.e. ones that can empower a lot of monsters, but ones that don't have very good mods on them. So if you find Pandemonium Sentinels that hit a large number of monsters, like 100 or more monsters, or at least 85 or more monsters, and they don't have great mods already on them, that's the sort of candidates for a regular power core and also for an augmenting power core. So this is an example of what the combination in a power core looks like. You've placed in this bronze Pandemonium Sentinel. This is one of the ones that empowers a small number of monsters. It's only empowering 48 enemies. And the one on the right empowers 71 enemies, which is a bit better. Now, the final result, unfortunately, only empowers 50 enemies, which is still derisory. What happens with the base? It's 50% to take the base of the left one, 50% to take the base of the right one, and then there is a separate percentage chance to upgrade it, which is small normally. In this case though, the person who's combined these has been unlucky and it's remained a bronze Pandemonium Sentinel, which is a worse outcome. However, they've got a good chance for enemies to have an essence reward and a good chance for enemies to have a currency reward, which is definitely something you would be happy to use. You'll notice that the currency reward hasn't come from either the left side or the right side Sentinel, and that's an RNG thing where additional mods can be exalted on when you do these power core combinations. There's not the most common outcome, but it does definitely happen a little bit. In a lot of ways, you can consider these power cores to be somewhat of an introduction to the way that Recombinators work. Let's discuss Recombinators now because they're the most important of the loot that you get out of the Sentinel mechanic, although a lot of the non-Recombinator loot can be good as well. So, Recombinator Basics. There are separate Recombinators for armor, weapons, jewelry. Each of them will take 2 items that have the same item class, i.e. 2 pieces of chest armor. These will be combined in an RNG fashion that will take some mods from each item and will have a slim chance to add additional mods that were not present on either item, or to upgrade or downgrade one of the modifiers that was put onto it. Now, Recombinators are literal item editors if you have enough of them and you have enough base items that have carefully chosen mods. These are one of the most powerful crafting mechanisms that has ever existed in PathOfExile, and it's no surprise that patch 3.18 and the Sentinel League pretty much obliterated all of the existing standard League merit tier items because Recombinators allowed better to be crafted. That said, there is a lot of nuance to using them well, but there is a powerful beginner strategy that I want to quickly outline in this video. This is like 9 or 10% worse than the advanced strategies, and we'll get to those advanced strategies in separate videos, but this basic strategy is not terrible and it will get you going with them. So the key thing to the beginner strategy is knowing that Recombinators calculate the prefixes that will be on the final item and the suffixes separately to each other. This is completely different to Chaos Orbs. If you want to prove this to yourself, take some Chaos Orbs and use them on a helmet. You'll find that you will never get a 1 prefix, 1 suffix item out of a Chaos Orb. However, you will find that sometimes you get 1 prefix and 3 suffixes, or you'll get 3 prefixes and 1 suffix on your helmet. This is because it is not independent. The prefixes and the suffixes influence each other. With Recombinators, the exact opposite is the case. Each one is calculated independently, and this is part of the power of these crafting tools, at least when you go beyond the beginner strategy. What this means is that you can build perfect prefixes on an item, and you can just have no concern about what the suffixes of any of your input items are, because that's something you can solve later. Now what you want to do for this beginner strategy is to source 2 amulets that each have a mod that you would desire to have together on the same item. For example, what we want to think about here is an amulet with the Exalters mod. Exalters is +1 to the level of all skill gems, and also a separate amulet that has the Volcanus mod, +1 to the level of all fire skill gems. Now it is optimal if neither of these items has any other prefixes. When we go into more detail on the beginner method, we'll discuss what happens when there are other prefixes on the items, and also a strategy called modifier doubling that ends up making Recombinators about 9% better than they will be with the beginner strategy. But for the beginner strategy, it is sufficient just to have them be the only prefixes present. Now, when you recombinate these with a Jewelry Recombinator, you're 1 in 3 to get an amulet that has both of these prefixes together. If you fail, you will actually get one of your inputs back, which is something that's really important and really powerful with Recombinator crafting. Most of the time when you fail a roll on Recombinator crafting, you don't completely go back to step 1. Normally you're going to go back 1 or 2 steps. And this is something that makes Recombinators incredibly powerful in the hands of someone that knows all of the nuances of them. Now, one thing that needs to be said about Recombinators, this is a mechanic that rewards doing a very large amount of trading. Other than the original synthesizer from patch 3.6, I would argue that this is the most trade-oriented mechanic in PathOfExile's history. That doesn't mean that you can't use it solo self-found, but if you are trying to use it solo self-found, your results are going to be worse, and it's going to take a much larger amount of effort. In solo self-found, that the times that you roll something good that you don't need end up completely going to waste, whereas in trade, you can then pass that on to someone else. Whatever the case, Recombinators definitely very, very strong in Trade League, and still actually so inherently powerful that even though they're worse in solo self-found, they still work there. Now, there will be more to follow on Recombinators in a later video. I want to really do this topic justice, and that means I need to do some research into some of the mechanics that I've forgotten about. But some of the topics we want to discuss: modifier duplication, influence blocking, Recombinator exclusive modifiers, and the AB plus AC strategy for crafting 3 perfect prefix items. So there's going to be a lot to go over there. What I will do though, in the last 20 seconds of this video, in the bottom left corner of your screen, I'll put up a video where I outlined a strategy for crafting a 3 perfect prefix caster wand. This is a video I put up during patch 3.18. Now, I do want to put a little bit of a disclaimer on this, that this was oriented towards the type of seismic trap builds that were really popular at that time, which was instant damage, critical strike based seismic trap builds. You probably don't play seismic trap as a critical strike instant damage build anymore. You're more likely to play it as a poison build if you do play it, and that means you would want to get different mods onto the item. But I do think that the core strategy can still be used. For example, if you wanted to craft something different, like a two-handed axe that has the Merciless mod, the Dictators mod, and the Flaring mod as its 3 prefixes on it. Like I said, Recombinators, if you have enough of them, are a literal item editor. They will let you print pretty much any item that you want. They are incredibly powerful, and that's going to be one of the main draw cards for a lot of people who are interested in crafting ridiculous items to take with them into Standard League. Anyways, that is the end of this recap of the Sentinel mechanics. If you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away down below. Otherwise, may your Recombinators and your power cores have interesting results.